I need a date for my ex-fiancée's wedding. I'll pay you $50,000. With that proposition, Michael Carter turned his maid into his fake girlfriend for one night of revenge. What he never expected was that his cruel dismissal afterward would ignite her transformation into someone he would later desperately need to impress. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how Chloe went from being humiliated at a high society wedding to launching her own sustainable design business that would eventually partner with and outshine the very man who once thought her disposable. The moment they come face to face again after 3 years apart will change everything you think about power, success, and redemption. Have you ever been so desperate for money that you considered doing something that would hurt your dignity? That's exactly the position Chloe found herself in when her millionaire boss made an outrageous offer. Michael Carter stood at his office window, the wedding invitation clutched so tightly in his hand that the expensive cardstock was beginning to crease. The gold-embossed lettering glinted in the sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office. Stella Montgomery cordially invites you to celebrate her marriage to Jonathan Pierce, his ex-fiancée, the woman who had left him 6 months ago, claiming he was emotionally unavailable and obsessed with status. Now she was marrying Jonathan Pierce, the son of his biggest business rival. Michael's jaw clenched as he imagined the whispers that would follow him if he showed up alone, the pitying glances, the assumption that he hadn't moved on, that he couldn't move on. The door opened with a soft click, and he turned to see Chloe Rodriguez entering with her cleaning cart. She had worked as his housekeeper for nearly 2 years, always quiet, efficient, and, most importantly to Michael, invisible when he needed her to be. Today, though, he noticed her for the first time. Chloe was nothing like Stella. Where Stella was tall and blonde with designer clothes and a finishing school pedigree, Chloe was petite with long, dark hair, always pulled back in a practical ponytail. No makeup, simple clothes, working-class background apparent in her practical shoes, and the way she kept her eyes down when in his presence. A plan began forming in Michael's mind. He watched as she methodically dusted the bookshelves, completely unaware of his scrutiny. "Chloe," he said sharply, causing her to startle. "Come here." She approached his desk cautiously, hands clasped in front of her. "Yes, Mr. Carter? How much do I pay you?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. Her brow furrowed slightly. $18 an hour, sir. And what would you say to making $20,000 for a single day's work? The shock registered immediately on her face, her eyes widening. For a moment, she seemed unable to speak. 20,000? She finally managed. "I need a date for a wedding. Not just any date. I need someone who will make a statement." His eyes moved over her critically. "Someone unexpected. Different." Understanding dawned in Chloe's eyes, followed immediately by something else. Indignation. "You want to hire me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" "I want to hire you to play a role," Michael corrected, his tone businesslike. "An ex of mine is getting married. I require someone on my arm who is the complete opposite of her. You fit that requirement perfectly." The bluntness of his assessment made Chloe flinch, but Michael didn't seem to notice as he continued outlining his proposition. "You would need to be convincing. Act adoring. Dress and behave according to my specifications. In return, you receive a sum that would probably take you—" He paused, calculating, "about 7 months to earn at your current rate." Chloe stood very still, her expression conflicted. She didn't immediately answer, which surprised Michael. He was accustomed to people jumping at his offers. "I need to think about it," she said finally. Michael raised an eyebrow. "What's there to think about? $20,000 for one day pretending to be someone you're not. Most people would consider that an easy decision." "Most people haven't been asked to be paraded around like a prop," Chloe responded, her voice quiet but firm. Something flickered across Michael's face, surprise, perhaps, that she hadn't immediately acquiesced. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially by someone he considered beneath his social standing. "Fine, 25,000. But I need your answer now." Chloe bit her lip, and Michael could see the internal struggle playing out across her expressive face. He knew exactly what she was weighing, her dignity against financial necessity. It was a calculation he had seen people make before, and he knew which way it usually went. "May I ask a question first?" she ventured. Michael gestured impatiently for her to continue. "Why me? You could hire an actress or an escort. Someone who does this professionally." "Because it needs to be authentic," Michael replied. "Anyone I hire would be scrutinized. You actually work for me. There's a paper trail. And you're—" He paused, searching for the right word. Simplicity will make the statement I want to make. The word hung in the air between them. Simplicity, as if she were a concept rather than a person. I have student loans, Chloe said suddenly. I'm studying design in the evenings. The community college program isn't expensive, but between rent and helping my mother with medical bills, I haven't been able to finish my degree. Michael didn't respond, merely checking his watch as if her personal circumstances were an inconvenient detour in the conversation. If I agree, she continued, stronger now, I have conditions. Conditions? Michael scoffed. You're hardly in a position to— I won't do anything that compromises my values. Chloe interrupted. I won't lie about who I am or where I come from. I'll play the role of your date, but I won't pretend to be someone I'm not fundamentally. Michael studied her for a long moment. There was something in her demeanor, a quiet dignity that he hadn't expected from someone in her position. It intrigued him, though he'd never admit it. Fine, he conceded, but you will need to look the part. I'll arrange for a stylist, makeup, hair, the works. You'll need to be convincing as someone I would actually date. The implication stung, and Michael saw it register in Chloe's eyes. The clear message that she wasn't someone he would normally consider worthy of his attention. The wedding is in 3 weeks, he continued, sliding a contract across the desk. I've outlined everything here. The payment will be transferred upon successful completion of the event. Chloe reached for the contract with slightly trembling hands. You had this prepared before you even spoke to me? I like to be efficient, Michael replied coolly. Sign it now, and we can begin preparations immediately. As Chloe read through the document, Michael observed her with clinical detachment. She was attractive in an unrefined way, he supposed. With the right clothes, hair, and makeup, she might even turn heads. Most importantly, she would be completely unexpected. The perfect way to show Stella that he had moved on to someone entirely different. This says I need to be available for preparation sessions starting tomorrow, Chloe noted, looking up from the contract. Correct. You'll need extensive coaching on how to behave in high society, how to speak, eat, dance, everything. I've hired professionals to handle it. Chloe took a deep breath, her internal struggle evident. And after the wedding, we go back to normal? I'm your maid again and you're my employer? Of course, Michael answered dismissively. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. After another moment of hesitation, Chloe picked up the pen. As she signed her name, Michael couldn't help but notice the grace in her handwriting. Small, neat letters that betrayed an attention to detail he hadn't expected. Good, he said. Taking back the contract, will you, be at this address tomorrow at 9 a.m. My assistant will email you the details. Chloe nodded, her expression unreadable as she turned to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. Mr. Carter, may I ask one more thing? Michael glanced up impatiently. What is it? When this woman, your ex, sees you with me, what exactly do you hope she'll think? The question caught him off guard. It was insightful in a way he hadn't anticipated from her. That I've moved on, he answered after a moment. That I've found someone real. The irony of using a fake relationship to prove he'd found someone real seemed lost on him. Chloe nodded slowly. And have you? Moved on, I mean. Michael's expression hardened. That's not relevant to our arrangement. Without another word, Chloe left, closing the door quietly behind her. Michael returned to the window, the wedding invitation still in his hand. He had gotten what he wanted, a date who would make a statement. So why did he feel so unsettled by the exchange? Outside his office, Chloe leaned against the wall, eyes closed. $25,000, enough to pay off her student loans and finish her degree, enough to help with her mother's medical bills, but at what cost to her self-respect? Michael watched from the sidelines, occasionally checking his phone, but never missing an opportunity to point out her failures. She's still walking like a housekeeper, he commented during her posture exercises. Can't you fix that? The casual cruelty of his observation made something snap inside Chloe. She stopped mid-stride and turned to face him directly. Why does this matter so much to you? She demanded, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. Why go to all this trouble just to impress someone who chose to marry someone else? The boutique fell silent. The stylists exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly unaccustomed to anyone challenging Michael Carter. For a brief moment, Michael's carefully maintained facade cracked. A flash of raw hurt crossed his features before he could master it. Because people like us don't lose, he said quietly. We don't get discarded. We move on to better things. The vulnerability in his voice was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by his usual cold authority. Take a break if you need it, but we're not leaving until this is perfect. By evening, Chloe's transformation was nearing completion. Her hair had been colored, cut, and styled into an elegant updo. Her nails were now perfectly manicured ovals. Her makeup, applied by an artist who worked with celebrities, emphasized her natural beauty while concealing any imperfections. The final step was selecting an evening gown for the wedding. After trying on dozen options that Michael rejected for various reasons, too modest, too flashy, wrong color, they finally agreed on a midnight blue silk creation that draped perfectly across her shoulders and flowed to the floor. Standing before the three-way mirror in the private dressing room, Chloe barely recognized herself. The woman staring back at her looked like she belonged on a red carpet, confident, elegant, untouchable. Despite the circumstances, a strange feeling washed over her, a mix of appreciation for her own beauty and anger at the implication that she needed to be completely remade to have value. The psychological impact of the makeover hit her all at once. She was experiencing exactly what researchers had documented, a profound shift in how she perceived herself and how she believed others would perceive her. The transformation created a dissonance between her true self and this new persona, but also, unexpectedly, a surge of confidence. "Well?" Michael's voice came from behind her. Chloe met his eyes in the mirror's reflection. "I look beautiful," she said, simply. It wasn't gratitude, it was an acknowledgement of truth. Something shifted in Michael's expression. For the first time that day, he seemed uncertain. "Yes," he agreed, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "You do." The night before the wedding, they met for final instructions in Michael's penthouse. His controlling behavior had intensified with each passing day, revealing the deep insecurities that his wealth and power usually concealed. "When people ask how we met, stick to the story we practiced. Don't mention anything about working for me," he instructed, pacing the living room. "If Stella approaches you, be polite but distant. Don't let her intimidate you." "Why would she intimidate me?" Chloe asked, genuinely curious. Michael stopped pacing. "Because that's what women like her do. They use insecurity as a weapon." He straightened his already perfect tie. "But you're different. You're confident because you don't belong in their world. You're just visiting." The irony of his statement wasn't lost on Chloe. In his attempt to mold her into his perfect date, Michael had inadvertently given her something valuable, a glimpse into the power of transformation and the hollow nature of the world he inhabited. As they prepared to leave for the wedding the following morning, Chloe stood in the hotel bathroom, making final adjustments to her appearance. The woman in the mirror looked poised and elegant, ready to step into the lion's den of high society. But beneath the polish was still Chloe, observant, resilient, and determined to maintain her dignity despite playing Michael's game. In elite social circles, appearance and etiquette served as barriers to entry, dictating who was accepted and who wasn't. Michael had paid to give her the keys to that kingdom for one day. What he hadn't counted on was how clearly she would see the prison he had built for himself. Wealth can buy entrance to exclusive circles, but even $25,000 can't purchase genuine connection. As whispers followed their every move through the reception hall, Chloe was about to demonstrate a quality no etiquette coach could teach and no designer could dress, a natural dignity that would leave even Stella speechless. The moment they stepped through the grand doors of the Westbrook Hotel's ballroom, conversations paused mid-sentence. The crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow across the room as heads turned toward Michael and his companion. For a fleeting moment, Chloe felt a rush of satisfaction at their stunned expressions. The hours of painful preparation had achieved their intended effect. She belonged here, at least in appearance, but appearances can be deceiving. As the initial shock wore off, Chloe felt the weight of judgmental glances pressing down on her shoulders. Despite the designer dress and perfect makeup, she couldn't shake the feeling of being an imposter. These people occupied a world where status was currency, and they could smell an outsider. A group of women near the champagne fountain whispered behind manicured hands, their eyes darting toward her with thinly veiled disdain. "Remember what I told you," Michael murmured, his hand firmly at the small of her back. "Don't let them see any weakness." Chloe straightened her spine, recalling Vivian's instructions about posture being the first indication of confidence. She may have felt like a fraud, but she refused to look like one. Taking a deliberate breath, she met the stares with a serene smile that revealed nothing of her inner turmoil. "Michael Carter, fashionably late as always," came a melodic voice from behind them. Turning in unison, they faced Stella Montgomery, radiant in her reception gown, her diamond jewelry catching the light with every slight movement. Her perfect smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she assessed Chloe from head to toe. "And you've brought a friend. How unexpected." The pause before friend hung in the air like a challenge. "Stella, this is Chloe Rodriguez," Michael replied smoothly. "Chloe, my former fiancée, Stella. Lovely to meet you." Chloe offered her hand with practiced grace. "Your wedding was beautiful. Congratulations." Stella's grip was firm, almost aggressive. "Thank you. I don't believe Michael's mentioned you before. How did you two meet?" Before Chloe could recite their rehearsed story, Michael surprised her by placing his arm around her waist possessively. "Chloe understands me in ways few people ever could," he said with unexpected sincerity. "Sometimes the most meaningful connections come when you least expect them." The statement hung between them, loaded with implications that even Chloe couldn't fully decipher. Stella's perfectly composed expression faltered for just an instant. "How fortunate for you both," Stella recovered quickly. "You must join us at the head table. Jonathan would love to meet you, Chloe." As they followed Stella through the crowd, Chloe felt Michael's grip tighten slightly around her waist. This wasn't part of their script. Sitting at the head table would mean sustained interaction with the bride, groom, and their closest friends, people who knew Michael intimately, people who might easily expose their charade. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and small talk. Chloe navigated conversations about art exhibitions she'd never attended and vacation destinations she'd never visited. With each successful exchange, she felt a small victory. The hostile glances continued, but she refused to be intimidated by them. "The first dance is about to begin," Michael whispered. "Are you ready?" Chloe nodded, recalling the hours they'd spent practicing in his living room. As they took to the dance floor, she focused on counting steps in her head. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, while maintaining a relaxed expression. "You're doing wonderfully," Michael said softly, his voice lacking its usual cold calculation. "Everyone's watching us." "Isn't that the point?" Chloe replied, careful to keep her smile in place. Michael looked down at her, something unfamiliar flickering in his eyes. "Yes, but not for the reasons you might think." As they moved across the floor, Chloe became aware of a subtle shift. Michael's hold had softened from performative to something almost gentle. His eyes no longer scanned the room for reactions. Instead, they remained fixed on her face. When he pulled her slightly closer than their rehearsed position called for, she felt a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with anxiety. "Michael," she whispered, confused by this departure from their arrangement. "Just follow my lead," he replied, but the words carried a different weight than when he'd uttered them during their practice sessions. For a moment, brief but undeniable, something authentic sparked between them. Not romance, perhaps, but a genuine human connection that neither had anticipated. The realization was so startling that Chloe nearly missed a step. The spell broke when the music ended, and polite applause filled the room. Michael led her from the dance floor with his hand still at the small of her back, but the touch now felt different, less proprietary, more protective. "Chloe, would you mind helping me with something in the powder room?" Stella appeared suddenly at their side, her voice honeyed but her eyes cold. Michael tensed beside her, but Chloe gave his arm a reassuring squeeze. "Of course, I'd be happy to." Following Stella through the crowd, Chloe prepared herself for whatever confrontation awaited. The powder room was mercifully empty when they entered, and Stella wasted no time once the door closed behind them. "Let's not pretend, shall we?" Stella's polished veneer dropped away. "Whatever Michael is paying you, it must be substantial." Chloe maintained her composure, though her heart raced. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Please," Stella scoffed. "Michael has always been transparent in his attempts to prove something. First with me, now with you. His little project from what, some agency? Or did he find you waiting tables somewhere?" The dismissive assessment stung, but Chloe refused to show it. "You seem very concerned about Michael's personal life for someone celebrating her wedding day." Stella's eyes narrowed. "Let me give you some advice. Michael doesn't see people. He sees assets and liabilities. Right now, you're an asset serving a purpose. When that purpose is fulfilled, you'll become a liability to be discarded." The words hit uncomfortably close to Chloe's own fears, but she stood her ground. "Thank you for your concern, but I think I understand Michael quite well." "Do you?" Stella leaned in. "Did he tell you about the others?" The women he's used and discarded when they no longer amused him or served his needs? Chloe felt her carefully constructed facade threatening to crack. But instead of retreating, she found strength in recognizing the power play for what it was. "It's interesting," Chloe said calmly, "that on what should be the happiest day of your life, you're spending time trying to intimidate a stranger about a man you claim to be over." Stella's composure slipped. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I think I do." Chloe straightened, her dignity genuine rather than practiced. "I'm dealing with someone who measures worth by wealth and status. But there are some things money can't buy, like the security of knowing your own value doesn't depend on someone else's approval." The bride's shocked expression confirmed that no one in her circle spoke to her this way. For a moment, they stood in silence, the power dynamic between them shifting imperceptibly. "Enjoy the rest of your reception," Chloe said finally, moving toward the door. "Your husband seems wonderful." She returned to find Michael in conversation with a group of men, his expression lightening when he spotted her. As she approached, he excused himself immediately. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low with concern. "What did she say to you?" "Nothing I couldn't handle," Chloe replied simply. Michael studied her face intently. "You're something else, you know that? Most people crumble under Stella's particular brand of social warfare. I'm not most people." "No," he agreed, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "You're certainly not." As the evening drew to a close, they stood together on the terrace overlooking the hotel gardens. The cool night air was a welcome relief after hours of performance. "You did better than I expected tonight," Michael said finally, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" Chloe asked, allowing herself a genuine smile for the first time that evening. "From me? Yes." Michael turned to face her. "You showed more poise in one evening than most people in that room have developed in a lifetime." The admission seemed to surprise even him, and Chloe wondered if perhaps the evening had affected him in ways neither of them had anticipated. The power between them still remained unbalanced, but something subtle had shifted, a small crack in the foundation of his authority. That small crack in Michael's authority was about to become a gaping chasm, but not in the way either of them expected. Within 48 hours of their triumph at Stella's wedding, the world Chloe thought she understood would completely unravel. The invisible line between being valued and being discarded is often thinner than we imagine, especially when dealing with someone whose power makes them believe they can rewrite reality. The morning after the wedding, Chloe woke with a lingering sense of accomplishment. She had done exactly what was asked of her, carried herself with dignity, charmed the guests, and even stood her ground against Stella's attempts at intimidation. Michael's rare compliment about her poise still echoed in her mind as she went about her regular housekeeping duties, though she couldn't help but notice his unusual absence from the house. What Chloe couldn't see was the storm brewing in Michael's social circles. Whispers were spreading among his business associates, subtle questions about his mysterious companion. Who was she really? Where had she come from? And most dangerously, what influence might she now have over Michael Carter? Behind these seemingly innocent inquiries was a calculated campaign orchestrated by none other than Stella. Though she'd lost Michael as a fiancé, she maintained connections with many of his investors and business partners. Over elegant lunches and private phone calls, she skillfully planted seeds of doubt. "I'm just concerned about Michael," she would say, with perfectly feigned sincerity. This new woman appeared out of nowhere, and suddenly she's speaking quite intimately with his biggest investors. It seemed calculated. These poisonous seeds fell on fertile ground. Michael had built his empire on control and calculated risk management. The idea that someone in his inner circle might be operating with their own agenda tapped directly into his deepest fears, fears that had been carefully buried beneath his confident exterior. By the second day after the wedding, Michael's mind had constructed an entire conspiracy. Every interaction Chloe had at the event was reinterpreted through a lens of suspicion. The way she had chatted easily with Jonathan's father, not friendly conversation, but potential industrial espionage. Her brief discussion with his investment banker, not polite small talk, but an attempt to gain financial information. When Chloe received a text summoning her to Michael's home office immediately, she assumed it might be about another event, or perhaps even a bonus for her performance. She straightened her uniform and knocked on his door with the same respectful demeanor she'd always shown. "Close the door," Michael said without looking up from his computer. His voice carried none of the warmth from their last interaction. Chloe complied, standing awkwardly near the entrance as Michael continued typing for nearly a full minute before acknowledging her presence. When he finally looked up, his eyes were cold. "I need to understand exactly what you discussed with Walter Briggs at the wedding." The question came so unexpectedly that Chloe blinked in confusion. "Mr. Briggs? The older gentleman with the glasses? I believe we just talked about the flower arrangements and how beautiful the venue was." Michael's jaw tightened. "And Philip Keene? What did you tell him about my business?" "Nothing, Mr. Carter. He asked what I did, and I stuck to our story about meeting at a charity event, just like we practiced." Chloe's heart began to race as she recognized the dangerous shift in Michael's demeanor. "That's not what I've heard," Michael said, standing abruptly. "I've received calls from 2 separate sources saying you were asking inappropriate questions about my company's upcoming merger." "That's not true," Chloe protested, her mind racing to understand the accusation. "I never mentioned your business at all. I only spoke to people who approached me, and I kept all conversations light and social." But Michael wasn't listening. His paranoia had already transformed Chloe from valuable asset to dangerous liability in his mind. Each denial only strengthened his conviction that she was hiding something. "I brought you into my world," Michael said, his voice rising. "I gave you an opportunity most people would kill for, and this is how you repay me? By trying to extract business information for your own gain?" Chloe stood stunned as the unfair accusations continued to mount. With growing horror, she realized that nothing she could say would penetrate the fortress of suspicion Michael had constructed. The more she defended herself, the more guilty she appeared in his eyes. "Mr. Carter," she finally interrupted, "I don't know who told you these things, but they're lying. I did exactly what you asked of me at the wedding. Nothing more, nothing less." For a moment, something flickered in Michael's eyes, perhaps a glimmer of doubt about his conclusions. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold resolution. "I can't have someone I don't trust working in my home," he said flatly. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately." The words hit Chloe like a physical blow. After nearly 2 years of service, after performing perfectly in the role he'd assigned her, she was being discarded without even the benefit of the doubt. "You're firing me? Based on rumors?" Chloe asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Based on multiple credible reports," Michael corrected, already turning his attention back to his computer. "Security will watch you collect your things. Your final check will be mailed, along with the agreed payment for the wedding appearance." In that moment, the full truth of her position crashed down on Chloe with brutal clarity. Despite the brief connection they'd shared, despite her flawless performance, she had never been a person to Michael, only a tool to be used and discarded when no longer convenient. The painful reality of workplace power abuse had never been clearer. Chloe's hands trembled slightly, but she straightened her shoulders and looked directly at the man who had just shattered her livelihood based on paranoid suspicions. "You know what the difference is between us, Mr. Carter," she said quietly. "When Stella tried to warn me about you, I gave you the benefit of the doubt. I defended your character, but she was right all along. You do see people as either assets or liabilities, not as human beings." Michael's head snapped up, surprised by her candor, but Chloe wasn't finished. "You're making a huge mistake," she continued, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Not because I'm irreplaceable as your housekeeper, but because when someone shows you who they truly are in a crisis, you should pay attention." Without waiting for a response, Chloe turned and walked out, her head held high despite the security guard who appeared to escort her to collect her belongings. As she gathered the few personal items from her locker in the staff area, a strange calm settled over her. The devastating blow of losing her job was real, but something else was emerging through the shock, a clarity about her own worth that no one, not even Michael Carter, could take away. In the span of just 48 hours, Chloe had gone from being praised as an invaluable partner to being escorted off the property as a potential threat. The whiplash of this treatment revealed more about Michael's character than any warning from Stella ever could. His deep-seated insecurities had made him susceptible to manipulations. willing to destroy relationships at the first hint of threat to his carefully constructed world. Walking away from Michael's mansion, Chloe carried something far more valuable than her small box of belongings. She carried the seed of possibility that his rejection had inadvertently planted. The security gates closed behind her with finality, but ahead stretched a road of unexpected opportunity. What happens when someone who's been invisible their entire working life suddenly has nothing left to lose? For Chloe, the answer would prove transformative. That first week was brutal. The shock of sudden unemployment left Chloe cycling through waves of anger, hurt, and fear. Her carefully budgeted savings would cover rent for 2 months, maybe 3 if she cut everything to bare essentials. But the sting of Michael's accusations hurt far worse than the financial uncertainty. She had defended his character to Stella, only to discover Stella's warnings had been perfectly accurate. Rather than immediately applying for similar domestic positions, Chloe made a decision that surprised even herself. Late one night, surrounded by job listings she couldn't bring herself to pursue, her gaze drifted to her community college design textbook stacked in the corner. "Maybe this is my chance," she whispered to her empty apartment. The next morning, instead of submitting applications, Chloe began collecting discarded materials from her neighborhood. Old cabinet doors abandoned near a dumpster, brass fixtures from a building renovation down the street, fabric scraps from the seamstress next door. Her small apartment slowly transformed into an impromptu workshop, where hurt and rejection found expression through creation rather than despair. Each piece Chloe crafted held bits of her story, not the story of being fired, but of being reborn. A mirror framed with reclaimed wood reflected back a woman standing firmly in her own vision. A lamp, assembled from discarded metal parts, cast light in patterns that transformed her small space. These weren't just decorative objects. They were statements of value discovered in what others had thrown away. Her first attempts were rough, experimental combinations of materials that didn't always succeed. But with each creation, her confidence grew alongside her technical skill. Where Michael had seen only a servant, Chloe was discovering an artist whose sustainability-focused vision gave discarded materials new purpose and beauty. With no marketing budget or business connections, Chloe turned to social media. She photographed her creations against simple backgrounds, telling the story of each piece's journey from waste to wonder. Her first Instagram post received just 12 likes, the second, 18. But by her 5th creation, a striking side table made from salvaged architectural elements, something shifted. Comments began appearing from strangers expressing genuine interest in her process and asking if items were available for purchase. "I never expected anyone to actually want these," she told her mother over the phone. "They're just things I made to keep my hands busy while figuring out my next move." But the interest continued growing. A local coffee shop owner spotted her work online and offered to display several pieces in their newly renovated space. When the first item sold 3 days later, Chloe stared at the payment notification in disbelief. The practical challenges were immense. Without formal business training, Chloe spent nights absorbing free online resources about pricing, shipping, and basic accounting. Her tiny kitchen table became command central for an enterprise built entirely on determination and creative vision. She made countless mistakes, underpricing early pieces, struggling with packaging, navigating customer service issues, but each setback became another lesson in resilience. What distinguished Chloe's work wasn't just aesthetic appeal, but the authenticity of her story. Unlike mass-produced sustainability marketed by corporate brands, her creations emerged from genuine necessity and vision. When she shared posts about transforming materials others had discarded, the parallel to her own journey resonated deeply with followers who valued both environmental consciousness and personal transformation. I found myself connecting with these conscious consumers who care about the story behind what they bring into their homes, she explained in an early interview with a sustainable design blog. They're not just buying an object, they're investing in a philosophy about value and renewal. By month 2, Chloe's following had grown enough to support a modest but consistent income. Unlike the predictable paycheck from Michael's household, these earnings carried something more valuable: ownership and self-determination. No one could fire her from her own creative vision. The social media revolution had created a pathway that would have been impossible for previous generations of artisans. Without traditional capital or industry connections, Chloe built direct relationships with customers around the world who valued her perspective. Each piece shipped became an ambassador for her growing brand, often leading to referrals and repeat business. Meanwhile, across town in his sprawling estate, Michael Carter found himself increasingly distracted during business meetings. The merger negotiations that had seemed so critical when he fired Chloe now failed to hold his full attention. Something about the dignified way she had walked out, refusing to beg or break, left him unsettled in ways he couldn't articulate. When his housekeeping staff reported difficulty maintaining his exacting standards without Chloe's guidance, he dismissed their concerns with irritation. But privately, her absence revealed how much he had come to rely on her quiet competence. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had discarded someone whose value he'd never fully recognized until she was gone. The turning point in Chloe's business came unexpectedly. A popular design website featured her work in a spotlight article about emerging sustainable designers, praising her innovative approach to luxury through reclamation. Orders surged overnight, transforming her side hustle into a legitimate business, requiring actual inventory management and production planning. What makes Rodriguez's work significant goes beyond aesthetics, the article noted. Each piece challenges our perception of value, asking us to recognize beauty and utility in materials society has deemed disposable. It's a philosophy as much as a design practice. The business growth necessitated expansion beyond her apartment. With careful financial planning, Chloe secured a small studio space in an artist collective, giving her room to create larger pieces and collaborate with other sustainable designers. Her community college design professors, discovering her emerging success, offered mentorship and connections to industry resources she might otherwise have missed. It was during this period of expansion that the most unexpected connection occurred. During a meeting with investment partners, Michael glanced at a magazine one of his associates had brought along. There, in a feature spread about sustainable luxury, was a familiar face he never expected to see again. Chloe, surrounded by stunning creations in her studio, described as a rising star in sustainable design. The article detailed her journey from hardship to entrepreneurial success, highlighting how her business had grown from a single Instagram post to a waiting list for commissioned pieces in just under 3 months. Michael sat frozen, hearing his colleagues admire the innovative vision and remarkable craftsmanship of someone he had discarded as worthless based on unfounded accusations. "This designer is extraordinary," remarked one of his investors, unaware of their connection. "She's doing the kind of sustainable luxury work that's perfectly aligned with where the market is heading. We should consider featuring pieces like these in the atrium of the new building." Michael merely nodded, unable to find words, as he stared at the images of Chloe's transformed life. The maid he had dismissed as a potential threat had recreated herself into someone whose vision and talent his own business associates now admired. The woman he had treated as disposable had proven herself indispensable to a growing community that valued precisely what she offered. In a twist that neither could have anticipated, Chloe's firing had become the catalyst for her most authentic success. Freed from the constraints of servicing someone else's needs and expectations, she had built something meaningful that reflected her true talents and values. The very hands Michael had thought only useful for polishing his silver were now creating objects that people competed to own. The universe loves irony. For someone who had once wielded complete authority over Chloe's livelihood, Michael now found himself in an unexpected position. Standing at the threshold of her domain, his power dissolved like morning mist. Success had given Chloe something money couldn't buy, the ability to simply say no to the man who once controlled her life. And that's exactly what she did when his message appeared on her phone 3 days ago. The text had been deceptively casual. "Chloe, I'd like to meet. There are things we should discuss." No apology. No acknowledgement of his actions. Just the same presumptuous tone that assumed compliance. She had smiled faintly at the screen before deliberately archiving the message without response. The Michael Carter she once knew expected immediate answers. Now he would learn what it felt like to be ignored. But Michael wasn't accustomed to being dismissed, which explained why he now stood in her studio doorway, looking oddly out of place among the raw materials and works in progress that filled the sunlit space. His tailored suit contrasted sharply with Chloe's casual workwear, paint-splattered jeans and a simple linen top that represented her new reality. "Your assistant said I could find you here," he said, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. Chloe set down her tools deliberately, wiping her hands on a cloth as she regarded him. "I don't recall inviting you," she replied, her voice steady. The confidence in her posture spoke volumes. This wasn't the woman who had once hurried to respond to his every summons. The studio around them told its own story. Pieces in various stages of completion occupied every surface, each one bearing Chloe's distinct aesthetic. Large windows flooded the space with natural light, illuminating the journey from discarded materials to objects of beauty and function. This was her kingdom, built from the ground up after he had cast her aside. "I wanted to see you in person," Michael said, his eyes scanning the space with unmistakable surprise. "Your work is impressive." "Thank you," Chloe replied simply, neither defensive nor eager for his approval. "But I doubt you came across town just to compliment my design skills." Michael shifted uncomfortably, looking less like the imperious businessman and more like someone unprepared for a difficult conversation. "I made a mistake," he finally admitted, the words seeming to cost him physical effort. "I was wrong and impulsive when I let you go." Chloe noted his careful choice of words. "Let you go instead of fired you without cause." Even now, he struggled to fully acknowledge what he had done. "That's not an apology, Michael," she observed, leaning against her workbench. "That's just admitting you made a tactical error." His expression tightened. "Fine. I shouldn't have accused you without evidence. The situation with Stella and the investors, I reacted poorly." Chloe watched him wrestling with words that clearly didn't come naturally. The man before her had likely never had to apologize sincerely to anyone. In his world, problems were solved with money, not genuine remorse. "You saw me as disposable," she said quietly, "a liability to be eliminated at the first hint of trouble. That wasn't a mistake, Michael. That was a revelation of character." His jaw clenched momentarily. "I've been following your success. What you've built here is remarkable. In just a few months, you've created something with real value and meaning." The compliment hung in the air, but Chloe recognized it for what it was. Michael's attempt to associate himself with her achievements rather than truly acknowledging the harm he had caused. It was so characteristic of him to pivot from apology to praise, as though admiration could substitute for accountability. "I didn't build this for your approval," she replied. "I built it because you showed me exactly what I didn't want to be. Someone who measures people's worth by what they can provide in the moment." Michael's expression shifted, frustration breaking through his carefully maintained facade. "What do you want from me, Chloe? I'm acknowledging I was wrong. I'm here, aren't I? Most people would appreciate that I took the time to come in person." And there it was, the fundamental disconnect in their value systems laid bare. In Michael's world, the mere act of showing up deserved gratitude. The power of his presence was supposed to be enough, regardless of the sincerity behind it. Chloe shook her head slowly. "That's exactly the problem. You think making an effort entitles you to forgiveness. That's not how it works." "I could help you," he offered, changing tactics. "Your business is doing well, but with my connections and resources, you could expand much faster. Reach markets you haven't even considered." The offer hung in the air between them. Another transaction, another attempt to use money and influence to smooth over deeper issues. To Michael, everything had a price, including absolution. "Listen to yourself," Chloe said softly. "You're still trying to buy your way out of discomfort. My forgiveness isn't for sale, and neither is my business." For perhaps the first time, genuine confusion crossed Michael's face. The concept of something he couldn't purchase or negotiate for seemed to genuinely perplex him. "What happened between us was business, Chloe. I made a decision based on information I had at the time. Perhaps it was wrong, but surely we can move forward professionally now." Chloe picked up a piece she had been working on, a lamp crafted from materials others had discarded. Her fingers traced the contours of the piece, feeling the history in each component. Do you know what I've learned about value, Michael? True worth isn't assigned by others. It exists independently of anyone's recognition," she said, her voice taking on a new strength. "When you fired me, you thought you were diminishing my value, but all you did was remove an obstacle between me and my potential." Something shifted in Michael's expression, a dawning realization that the dynamics between them had fundamentally changed. His presence no longer commanded deference. His approval was no longer required. "I didn't come here to be lectured," he said, his tone hardening slightly. "No," Chloe agreed. "You came here expecting that your presence alone would be enough, that I'd be grateful for the attention of someone who once saw me as nothing more than convenient help. That's not going to happen." She set the lamp down and straightened to her full height. "My success isn't connected to you, Michael. You were just an obstacle I had to overcome, and now I have." The finality in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a negotiation or the beginning of reconciliation. It was closure, on her terms. Michael stood silently for a moment, the rejection unfamiliar territory for a man accustomed to getting his way. "You've changed," he finally said. "No," Chloe corrected him. "I've just stopped allowing others to define me. There's a difference." As Michael turned to leave, something subtle but profound passed between them. A mutual recognition that the power had shifted irrevocably. The man who had once held Chloe's livelihood in his hands now stood before her as just another person seeking something she alone could grant or withhold. His hand paused on the doorframe. "For what it's worth, I am sorry," he said quietly, the words coming too late to carry their intended weight. Chloe nodded once in acknowledgement, but offered nothing more. She had already turned back to her work when the door closed behind him. The phone rang just as Chloe was putting the finishing touches on her latest commissioned piece. With Michael's awkward apology still lingering in her mind, she grabbed her phone without checking the caller ID, expecting it to be one of her regular clients. "Is this Chloe Rodriguez? This is Marion Jeffries from Urban Deco Designs." Chloe nearly dropped her phone. Urban Deco was the premier sustainable design firm in the country, known for pushing boundaries and setting industry standards. They weren't just successful. They were change makers, the kind of company that could catapult a small designer from local recognition to national prominence. "We've been following your work for some time," Marion continued, her voice warm but professional. "Your approach to sustainability aligns perfectly with an exciting new project we're spearheading. We'd like to bring you on as lead designer." Chloe's heart raced as she listened to Marion outline the project. A revolutionary mixed-use building that would showcase cutting-edge sustainable practices while maintaining luxury aesthetics. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she had dreamed about when starting her business. But then came the catch. "The project is a collaboration with Carter Enterprises," Marion said, her voice betraying no awareness of what that name might mean to Chloe. "They're providing primary funding and infrastructure support." The excitement that had been building inside Chloe crashed like a wave hitting rocks. Of course it would be Michael's company. The universe really did have a twisted sense of timing. Just when she had finally established herself independently, just when she had firmly closed the door on their complicated past, fate was dragging them back into each other's orbits. "I understand if you need time to consider," Marion added after Chloe's prolonged silence. "It's a significant commitment, but I should mention that you were specifically requested for this project." That night, Chloe barely slept, her mind racing through every possible scenario. The professional opportunity was undeniable. This project could establish her name in sustainability circles for years to come. But working with Michael meant reopening wounds that had barely started to heal, putting herself back in proximity to someone who had once discarded her without a second thought. By morning, she had made her decision. She would accept, but entirely on her terms. She drafted a detailed contract outlining her creative control, her boundaries for communication, and explicit recognition requirements. If Michael wanted her expertise, he would have to acknowledge its value properly this time. When she called Marion back with her decision, the woman seemed unsurprised by Chloe's conditions. "I'll have legal review your terms," she said. "But between us, I think they'll be accepted without much pushback. There seems to be a strong desire to have you specifically on this project." 1 week later, Chloe found herself walking through the polished glass doors of Carter Enterprises headquarters. The same security guard who had once checked her cleaning ID now nodded respectfully as she was escorted to the main conference room. The irony wasn't lost on her. The first project meeting was tense, but surprisingly civil. Michael sat at the head of the table, but immediately deferred to Chloe when she began presenting her initial concepts. There was no trace of the dismissive employer who had once barely acknowledged her presence. Instead, he seemed almost deferential, asking insightful questions about her approach and nodding thoughtfully at her responses. "Chloe has a unique perspective that's exactly what this project needs," he told the assembled executives. "Her understanding of how to balance luxury aesthetics with sustainability principles is unparalleled." She caught his eye across the table, searching for any hint of manipulation or insincerity. But all she found was what appeared to be genuine respect, something she had never seen from him before. As weeks passed and the project developed, Chloe remained cautious but couldn't help noticing subtle changes in Michael's behavior. He actively sought her input on decisions that went beyond her contracted responsibilities. In meetings with investors, he publicly credited her ideas instead of presenting them as his own. When certain design elements were questioned, he defended her vision with unexpected conviction. During one particularly contentious meeting, an investor challenged Chloe's proposed use of reclaimed materials for the building's grand entrance, suggesting it would look cheap compared to traditional luxury materials. Before Chloe could defend her choice, Michael leaned forward. "I trust her work," he stated firmly, silencing the room. Chloe's designs have consistently proven that sustainability doesn't have to compromise aesthetics. If anything, her approach enhances the uniqueness and value of the space. The meeting continued, but Chloe found herself distracted by those 4 simple words. "I trust her work." From anyone else, they might have been unremarkable. From Michael Carter, the man who had once fired her based on groundless accusations without giving her the benefit of the doubt, they represented a seismic shift. After the meeting, Chloe deliberately lingered in the conference room, organizing her materials until everyone had left except Michael. "You didn't have to do that," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "Do what?" he asked, gathering his own papers. "Defend my design choices. I'm perfectly capable of explaining my reasoning to skeptical investors." Michael looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "I know you are, but as the financial partner in this project, my support carries weight with certain people. And unlike before," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "I've learned to recognize talent worth defending." There was an uncomfortable silence, heavy with unspoken history. "This doesn't mean I've forgotten what happened," Chloe finally said. "I wouldn't expect you to," he replied quietly. "I'm just grateful you were willing to work on this project despite our history. Your vision is exactly what it needs to be successful." As she drove home that evening, Chloe found herself in an unexpected state of conflict. She had accepted this project expecting to maintain rigid professional boundaries, to do her job brilliantly, but keep emotional distance. She hadn't anticipated Michael's apparent transformation, or how it would complicate her neatly compartmentalized feelings about their past. Over the following months, the project evolved in ways that challenged Chloe creatively while providing her unprecedented visibility in the industry. Urban Deco featured her prominently in their promotional materials, and several design publications had already requested interviews about her role in the groundbreaking development. During site visits, Chloe often found herself working directly with Michael, their professional relationship developing a rhythm that felt bizarrely comfortable given their history. He listened when she spoke. He asked questions rather than making assumptions. When she suggested modifications to plans, he considered them thoughtfully instead of dismissing them outright. "Your vision for this atrium is remarkable," he said during one walkthrough, looking up at the space where natural light would filter through recycled glass panels. "It transforms something practical into something profound." "That's always been my approach," she replied, keeping her focus on the blueprints rather than his face, finding the beauty in what others discard. His expression shifted slightly, catching the double meaning in her words. As the project passed its halfway mark, Chloe reluctantly admitted to herself that working with Michael was not the painful experience she had anticipated. If anything, it was proving to be professionally fulfilling in ways she hadn't expected. The platform was larger, the resources more substantial, and the impact potentially more significant than anything she could have achieved on her own at this stage of her career. Beyond the professional partnership forming between them lay a question that kept Chloe awake at night. What happens when the villain in your story starts dismantling their own empire? Michael's quiet rebellion against his family's destructive legacy was beginning to reveal itself in ways that no calculated PR move could explain. Week after week, Chloe watched for signs that would confirm her suspicions, that Michael's apparent change was merely an elaborate performance. But instead, she found herself documenting a growing list of evidence suggesting something far more unexpected: genuine transformation. During a critical supplier meeting, Michael stunned his executive team by announcing new ethical sourcing requirements that would significantly increase production costs. When his CFO objected, citing shareholder concerns, Michael simply replied, Some costs don't appear on balance sheets, but we pay for them eventually. The decision to sever ties with 3 highly profitable but environmentally questionable vendors wasn't publicized in press releases or social media campaigns. It simply happened, quietly and deliberately. The most revealing moment came during an unexpected budget crisis. Construction costs had soared due to material shortages, creating a significant shortfall. The project team prepared contingency plans that included cutting corners on sustainability features, the very heart of Chloe's design vision. Everyone expected Michael to make the financially prudent choice. After all, this was a man whose business philosophy had always prioritized profit above all else. "We're not compromising on quality or sustainability," Michael announced during the emergency meeting, surprising everyone. "We'll find the money elsewhere. The integrity of this project isn't negotiable." Later, Chloe discovered he had personally covered the difference rather than dilute the project's environmental commitments. These weren't isolated incidents. Through casual conversations with his staff, Chloe learned about other changes happening behind the scenes. Michael had implemented a mentorship program that paired young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds with business leaders. He had quietly established a fund that provided microloans to sustainable startups without demanding the punishing terms typical of venture capital. "He doesn't talk about any of it," confided Michael's executive assistant. "It's strange. The old Michael would have made sure everyone knew about his generosity. This new version seems almost embarrassed by recognition." The transformation wasn't just professional. Chloe noticed subtle shifts in how Michael interacted with people regardless of their status. The dismissive tone that once characterized his communication with service staff had disappeared. He remembered names. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. The change was so gradual that many hadn't noticed, but Chloe, who had experienced the worst of his arrogance, couldn't miss it. One rainy evening, as they worked late finalizing design elements, Michael's guard dropped momentarily. "My father built his fortune clear-cutting ancient forests in Southeast Asia," he said without preamble, staring out at the rain. "He used to boast about how many acres they could demolish in a day. Called environmentalists tree-hugging parasites." The bitterness in his voice was palpable. This project is the opposite of everything he stood for. The confession caught Chloe off guard. It was the first time Michael had mentioned his father, and the revelation provided context for his transformation that she had never considered. His commitment to sustainability wasn't just a business pivot, it was a personal rebellion against a destructive legacy. The true test came unexpectedly at an industry showcase where their project was featured. Stella appeared, clearly uncomfortable with the growing positive attention surrounding Michael and Chloe's collaboration. During the networking reception, she approached a group of influential investors where Chloe was explaining her design philosophy. "It's fascinating how quickly someone can reinvent themselves when convenient," Stella remarked with practiced casualness. "One day cleaning houses, the next day designing them. Some might call it inspiring. Others might call it opportunistic." Before Chloe could respond, Michael stepped forward. What surprised her wasn't that he intervened. That would have been expected from the old Michael, always needing to control the narrative. What stunned her was how he did it. "Chloe doesn't need me to defend her work," he said calmly. "It speaks for itself, but I do want to correct a misconception. She isn't successful because of connections or convenience. She's successful despite obstacles, some of which I regrettably put in her path. Her talent was always there. The only difference is that now people are finally paying attention." It wasn't possessive or controlling. It wasn't about him at all. He simply stated truth and then stepped back, allowing Chloe to continue her conversation with the investors. Stella retreated, her attempt to undermine Chloe neutralized not by Michael's power, but by his honest acknowledgement of Chloe's merit. Psychological research has long suggested that meaningful character transformation requires confronting uncomfortable truths, something most people actively avoid. It's far easier to maintain self-deception than to acknowledge fundamental flaws in our character or behavior. The process isn't overnight. It requires consistent self-reflection and the uncomfortable work of accountability. 2 days later, Chloe found Michael alone in the project office reviewing sustainability metrics. Something had been bothering her since the industry event. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked directly. "The ethical suppliers, the mentorship programs, standing up to Stella. None of it benefits you financially or professionally. If anything, some of these decisions have cost you? Michael was quiet for a long moment, considering her question with unusual thoughtfulness. Meeting you forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths, he finally admitted. Success without purpose or genuine connection is hollow. I built an empire, but it was empty. The way I treated you, it wasn't an anomaly, it was a pattern, using people, discarding them. I didn't like who I saw when I finally looked honestly at myself. The vulnerability in his voice was something she'd never heard before. No calculation, no performance, just raw honesty. Change isn't a straight line, he continued. I still catch myself falling into old patterns, but I'm trying to be more aware of the impact I have on others. It's humbling to realize how much damage you've done without even noticing. Chloe remained skeptical. Every psychological study she'd read suggested that genuine character transformation required more than good intentions. It demanded consistent behavior change over time, especially when no one was watching. The reformed, difficult boss is almost a cliché in business literature. Temporary improvements that revert to type when stress increases or when the motivation for change diminishes. Yet she couldn't deny the evidence accumulating before her. Michael was implementing meaningful changes even in areas she couldn't see. The transformation wasn't performative. It extended beyond their professional interaction into decisions and behaviors that had no direct impact on their working relationship. The evidence of Michael's transformation was undeniable, but the emotional stakes were infinitely higher. What science fails to measure is the precise moment when skepticism transforms into trust, especially after betrayal has left its scars. As their sustainable building project neared completion, Chloe stood at the crossroads between self-protection and second chances, facing the most dangerous question of all. Was Michael's change real enough to risk her heart? The tower of glass and reclaimed materials stood as a testament to their professional success, but it was the foundation between them that occupied Chloe's thoughts during sleepless nights. The connection growing between them felt genuine. Michael's respect for her vision, his thoughtful questions, the way he'd begun to anticipate her needs during presentation. Yet memories of his cutting dismissal lingered like phantom pain, a warning system her mind had installed to prevent future wounds. "You're playing with fire," warned Leah, Chloe's closest friend, over coffee one morning. "I know he's being nice now, but don't forget how quickly he discarded you when it suited him." She stirred her latte aggressively, the spoon clinking against ceramic. Power dynamics like that don't just disappear, they go underground. Chloe traced the rim of her cup, considering. "I'm not saying you're wrong, but I've watched him closely for months now. The changes extend beyond our project, beyond what I can see. He's funding sustainable startups, mentoring young designers from backgrounds like mine." "That could all be calculated," Leah countered. "People with his resources can manufacture whatever image serves them." The warning echoed Stella's unexpected visit to Chloe's studio the previous week. She'd appeared without warning, elegant as ever in designer clothes that cost more than Chloe's monthly rent. "I heard you're working with Michael," Stella had said, examining a piece of Chloe's furniture with manicured fingers, "and that it's becoming more than professional." Chloe had kept her voice neutral. "Our relationship is complicated." "It always is with him," Stella replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Michael excels at transformation when he needs something. But believe me, he always reverts to what he is when the stakes are highest." She'd placed a sleek business card on Chloe's workbench. "When it happens, not if, when, call me. We survivors should stick together." Now, watching the sunrise cast prism patterns through their building's innovative glasswork, Chloe wondered if she was being naive. Psychological research suggested that trust could be rebuilt after betrayal, but it required the betrayer to demonstrate genuine change consistently over time. Had Michael's actions met that threshold? The final presentation to investors loomed just days away. Urban Deco had assembled their most important clients, industry journalists, and environmental certification boards for the unveiling of what promised to be a landmark in sustainable architecture. Chloe had prepared meticulously, rehearsing her presentation points until they flowed naturally. This was her moment to showcase not just the building, but her entire philosophy on sustainable design. When the day arrived, the presentation space buzzed with anticipation. Chloe spotted Michael across the room in deep conversation with the lead investors, his characteristic confidence evident in his stance. When their eyes met briefly, something unexpected flickered between them. Vulnerability, perhaps. As the presentation began, Chloe braced herself for Michael to take center stage. It was his company's funding, after all. his connections that had made the project possible. Instead, he introduced her with a deference that surprised even the Urban Deco executives. "The visionary behind what you're about to see isn't me," Michael stated clearly into the microphone. "Chloe Rodriguez reimagined not just this building, but the entire approach to sustainable luxury. My role has simply been to recognize her brilliance and provide the resources to make it happen." A murmur rippled through the audience. Such public acknowledgement wasn't just professional courtesy, it was a complete surrender of credit. Chloe felt heat rise to her cheeks as Michael stepped back, physically ceding the spotlight. Throughout her detailed presentation of the building's innovative features, he remained silent, except when directly addressed, deferring all technical questions to her expertise. When the investors erupted in applause at the conclusion, Chloe caught a glimpse of Stella watching from the back of the room, her expression unreadable. The celebration dinner afterward hummed with success. Urban Deco's CEO had already hinted at future collaborations, and 2 international design publications had requested exclusive interviews. As the evening wound down, Chloe found herself alone with Michael on the rooftop garden of their building, a space he'd insisted on expanding beyond the original plans. "I wanted to show you something," he said, leading her to a section she hadn't seen completed yet. In the center stood a bronze plaque that read, "The Rodriguez Vision, Finding Beauty and Purpose in What Others Discard." Chloe's throat tightened. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," Michael replied quietly. "And not for the optics. There's no press here, no investors, just acknowledgement of truth." The silence between them felt weighted with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Michael spoke again, his voice lower than she'd ever heard it. "I don't expect you to forgive me easily for how I treated you," he said, looking not at her but at the city lights beyond. "I wouldn't in your position, but I hope you'll give me the chance to prove that this change is real, over time." It wasn't a grand declaration or an entitled assumption. In those careful words, Chloe recognized something unfamiliar from the Michael she'd first known, an understanding that trust must be earned rather than demanded. Later that night, alone in her apartment, Chloe called Leah. "The real question isn't whether he's changed," she said after recounting the evening's events. "It's whether I'm willing to risk finding out." "And are you?" Leah asked. Chloe considered the question that had kept her awake for weeks. The safest choice would be to maintain professional distance, to protect herself from potential hurt. Yet something within her resisted that safety, perhaps the same instinct that had pushed her to build something from nothing after losing everything. "I think," she said slowly, "that there's a middle path. Not blind trust, but not permanent walls either. Boundaries that can become more permeable as trust is proven." The next morning, Chloe arrived at their building early before the maintenance crews or office staff. She found Michael already there, reviewing sustainability certification documents at his desk. I've been thinking about what you said," she began without preamble, "about proving change over time." Michael set down his papers, giving her his complete attention. A small but significant difference from their early interactions when he'd multitasked through her words. "I'm not ready to fully trust you," Chloe continued, "but I'm willing to create space for the possibility, with clear boundaries and the understanding that this is entirely on my terms." "What would those terms look like?" Michael asked. No hint of the entitlement that had once characterized his negotiations. "Honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, respect for my independence, and the understanding that at any point I can step back without explanation or guilt." Michael nodded slowly. "That seems reasonable, more than reasonable." "It's not a promise," Chloe clarified. "Just an open door that I can close if needed." "I understand," he replied, and for perhaps the first time, Chloe believed that he truly did. 6 months earlier, she'd been folding his laundry. Now she was unveiling a revolutionary architectural marvel beside him while cameras flashed. What happens when the woman once dismissed as just the help suddenly becomes the visionary everyone wants to celebrate? The morning of the grand unveiling arrived with a crisp autumn breeze that carried the scent of possibility. Chloe stood at her apartment window, gazing at the skyline that would soon feature their building, a testament to second chances and unexpected partnerships. Her phone buzzed with texts from industry journalists requesting last-minute interviews, sustainability experts flying in from Europe, and even a message from Urban Deco's founder confirming their arrival time. She ran her fingers over the fabric of her designer suit, not one selected for her by someone else, but a piece she'd chosen that reflected both her professional status and her personal values. Made from reclaimed textiles and designed by an up-and-coming sustainable fashion brand, it represented everything her journey had become. Transformation without losing authenticity. The drive to the venue was silent, not from tension but from mutual respect for the enormity of what they'd accomplished. Michael, dressed impeccably as always, occasionally glanced at Chloe with an expression she'd never seen during her years as his housekeeper. Genuine admiration, mixed with something deeper she couldn't quite name. "Nervous?" he finally asked as the car approached the venue where hundreds had already gathered. "Not about the building," Chloe replied with a confidence that would have been unimaginable months earlier. "We know what we've created. I'm just not used to being in the spotlight rather than cleaning around it." Michael nodded, understanding the layers behind her words. "The spotlight is exactly where you belong, Chloe. Just remember that every person waiting out there is about to witness your vision, not mine." The scene that greeted them was overwhelming. Photographers jostling for position, industry leaders engaged in animated discussions, and a massive banner featuring both their names in equal sizing, not "Michael Carter Presents" or "Chloe Rodriguez Protégé of," but true equals in creation and recognition. As they walked toward the entrance, Chloe noticed something remarkable. People weren't just acknowledging Michael with a cursory glance her way. They were approaching her directly, eager to discuss specific elements of the design that had captured their imagination. The power dynamics that had once defined their relationship had been completely dismantled, rebuilt from the foundation up into something neither could have imagined. The ceremony began with Urban Deco's CEO praising the unprecedented nature of their partnership. What we're witnessing today isn't just architectural innovation. It's a new model for collaboration that crosses traditional boundaries of experience, background, and perspective. When Michael took the stage, Chloe prepared herself for the familiar corporate tone she'd heard him use at countless events she'd previously attended as staff. Instead, he stepped to the microphone and surprised everyone. "I've opened many buildings in my career," Michael began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "But I've never been more proud than I am today, because this is the first project where I can honestly say I wasn't the visionary. That honor belongs solely to Chloe Rodriguez." A murmur rippled through the audience as Michael continued. "What began as my attempt at redemption transformed into something far more meaningful when Chloe showed me what true vision looks like, seeing potential and value where others see only waste or limitation. This building stands as physical proof of her extraordinary talent." As Chloe stepped forward to thunderous applause, she realized the journey had come full circle. Once invisible in these spaces, except to refresh drinks or adjust lighting, she now commanded the room's complete attention. Her presentation flowed naturally, explaining how each revolutionary element of the building represented their shared philosophy about sustainability and renewal. After the formal presentations and the ceremonial ribbon cutting, Michael gently touched her elbow. "There's something I'd like to show you before the reception gets too crowded," he said, leading her toward a private elevator. The doors opened directly onto the building's rooftop, a space not included in any of the official plans or presentations. Chloe gasped at what she saw. A vibrant garden stretched before her, but unlike typical corporate green spaces, this one told a story. Each section featured photographs and narratives of community members whose lives had been touched by the project, from local artisans who provided reclaimed materials to families now employed by the businesses housed within. "You once told me that buildings should serve people, not the other way around," Michael said quietly. "I wanted to make sure we never forgot that." Chloe moved through the garden, reading stories of transformed lives. A homeless veteran now managing the building's innovative waste reduction program. A single mother leading tours of the sustainable features. A teenager who discovered engineering through the community outreach during construction. "This isn't in the official plans," she whispered, overwhelmed by the realization that Michael had created this space without publicity or credit. "Not everything valuable needs to be seen by everyone," he replied. "Some things matter just because they're right." The weeks following the unveiling brought a deluge of opportunities that Chloe could never have imagined. Environmental design programs requested guest lectures, international conferences extended speaking invitations, and 3 different countries asked her to consult on government sustainability initiatives. One evening, while reviewing these opportunities in Michael's office, she hesitated over an invitation to speak at a 6-week symposium in Copenhagen. "This one would take me away for quite a while," she said, studying his expression for any sign of the controlling behavior she'd once known so well. Michael looked up from his desk, his eyes clear and steady. "You should absolutely go if you want to. Your voice deserves to be heard globally." Then, with genuine warmth that still surprised her, he added, "I'm rooting for you, always." The simple statement hung in the air between them, not as a platitude but as evidence of how profoundly he had changed. The man who once viewed her as disposable property was now championing her independent success, even when it meant her leaving. On the night before her departure for Copenhagen, they stood together on the rooftop garden, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled. The space had become their sanctuary, a place where the pretenses and power dynamics of the outside world couldn't intrude. "I never thanked you properly," Michael said suddenly, breaking their comfortable silence. "For what?" "For showing me what I was missing when I saw people as either assets or liabilities. For being brave enough to stand up to me when I was wrong. For creating something beautiful from the mess I made." Chloe turned to face him, recognizing the vulnerability in his expression. "We both built something neither of us could have created alone." Michael took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Chloe, I need to say something. And I want to be very clear about my intentions. I have feelings for you that go beyond our professional partnership or friendship." He held up his hand when she began to respond. "But I'm not asking for anything. I'm not expecting reciprocation or making this a condition of our work together. I simply wanted you to know that you've become important to me in ways I never anticipated. And regardless of how you feel, that won't change. How? I respect your talent or support your success." The honesty of his declaration, offered without expectation or manipulation, stood in stark contrast to the transactional way he'd once approached every human interaction. This wasn't the Michael who had hired her as a prop or fired her out of paranoia. This was someone who had genuinely learned to see her complete humanity and value it for its own sake. Their relationship had evolved into something neither could have predicted, a partnership where power flowed equally, where respect wasn't demanded but freely given, where differences in background became strengths rather than divisions. As Chloe and Michael's story draws to a close, we're left with a powerful truth about human transformation. The journey from exploitation to equality wasn't achieved through eloquent promises or momentary kindness. It required consistent actions that proved genuine change had occurred. Michael's transformation wasn't complete until his behavior aligned with his words, when he defended Chloe publicly, supported her independence, and recognized her value without expecting anything in return. Their story challenges us to reflect on our own identities. Do we allow ourselves to be defined by how others have treated us in the past? Or do we find strength in recognizing our inherent worth, regardless of external validation? Chloe's resilience reminds us that while we cannot control how others value us, we always retain the power to recognize our own worth and demand that others do the same. In the end, true dignity comes not from others' approval, but from our unwavering belief in ourselves.